Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us for yet again another exciting ecology-oriented video. Today, what we're going to talk about is the process of succession, or how communities can change and progress over time. This is going to be a bit of a short one, so let's go ahead and get right to it, shall we? The first thing we need to discuss is what we call a pioneer species. So, pioneer species are species of plants that go ahead and help colonize barren habitats, or habitats where not much was there before, maybe rock, and that's about it. No soil bed, nothing like that. These things are the ultimate species when it comes to paying it forward. These species' sole purpose is to go ahead, live, reproduce, and die, and repeat, to improve the conditions for other species who will eventually go ahead and replace them. So some examples of this include things like lichens, small plants like crabgrass, horseweed, and other things that have very brief life cycles. So they live, reproduce, die, and repeat the cycle. So these always come first when it comes to succession. And this will go ahead and continue. We'll talk about it more in detail a little bit later and actually go through an example of succession. But where it ultimately ends is the climax community. So the climax community is ultimately the end. It's a stable array of species that remain relatively unchanged over time. These primarily contain large woody mature trees like oak, hickory, and in some cases beech and maple, depending on where you're at. So succession does not always move towards a predictably specific climax community, and it's often also going to depend on the habitat or environment that you're in. For example, if you're going ahead and sitting in the grasslands where normally, we have very tall grass, wheat, things of that nature, you're probably not going to see a large, majestic redwood tree growing in the middle of that. Same thing for the African savanna. Due to the climate, the humidity, and everything else in the area, it probably won't reach a climax community that, let's say, a temperate deciduous forest would. So depending on the area, that's going to determine what the climax community is. So succession, changes to a community. There are two primary ways this can happen. The first one, oddly enough, is primary. So primary means that nothing was there to begin with. Nothing but rock, barren, desolate waste. So even the soil bed has to be created. And this is done through the usage of the pioneer species, the lichens, the crabgrasses, things of that nature. So for example, volcanic eruptions go ahead, magma comes racing down the side of a volcano, hits the ocean, cools, and we have new land that wasn't there before. Or a glacial retreat, where things have been frozen for years, and as things have warmed up, that glacier begins to melt and retreat, leaving behind new land that has never had any soil on it. So this is going to go ahead and reach the climax community. It will do it, but it's going to do it at a much slower pace. Meanwhile, secondary succession means the soil bed is already there, or from the soil bed. So this normally starts after a natural disaster, such as a flood, forest fire, anything of that nature, that makes the environment go ahead and start over. So an example, like we said, fire, flood, other natural disasters. And this is going to reach the climax community much more quickly because the soil bed is already there. And specifically after a fire, for example, all the nutrients of the previous plants get burned to ash and add their nutrients to the soil bed. So primary, very slow. Secondary, much quicker. So as we see here, nothing was there. Then we have these small plants, the grasses, the trees, the shrubs. Then ultimately, we get to where we need to be. Secondary, we had the trees, everything burns down, and it gets back to that climax community much more quickly. The last thing I wanted to go ahead and talk with you all about today is how succession in Virginia works. So, Virginia is a temperate deciduous forest. So if we were going to go ahead and follow from year 1 all the way up to year 100 plus, our pioneer species in year 1 would be things like horseweed and crabgrass. These are annual plants with very short life cycles. So as we continue, year 2, asters and ragweed would become much more prominent. In years 3 to 18, these small lichens and other pioneer species would start to die off now that we have a solid soil bed, and grasses and shrubs such as blackberry and sumac would start to go ahead and grow. In addition, young pine trees could also start to develop around this time. In years 19 to 30, the young pine trees become tall enough to shade out the grasses and shrubs. So now we have trees starting to grow. Years 30 to 100 plus. In years 30 to 70, the pine trees start to mature, and the pine seedlings unfortunately are not able to grow due to the shade being cast upon them by the older, much larger pine trees. However, hardwood trees such as oak, hickory, and even maple don't need nearly as much light to go ahead and grow, so they can actually grow in the shade of these larger trees. So years 70 to 100. Mature pine forest has an understory of young hardwoods, so oak, maple, and hickory. So that means that these hardwood trees are starting to grow, though they're not nearly as tall as the pine trees yet. However, as the pine trees begin to die out, due to out-competition, the transition to a hardwood forest will begin. In the years of 100 plus, the oak and hickory forest has now gone to the point where it is the dominant climax community. It has an understory, or the trees below it, are also young oak and hickory and other shade-tolerant trees. So here, in roughly 100 plus years, we've gone from our our pioneer species to our climax community. So just an overview of what this looks like. In the bottom left, we have our annual weeds, which would be our pioneer species, and over time, as things progress to the right, it is gradually going ahead and going through the process of succession until it reaches our climax community, which include our mature oak and hickory forest. So this is just one example of how succession works here in Virginia. And I hope it goes ahead and kind of clears things up. Remember, pioneer to climax community. And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to go ahead and do it for today's lesson on succession. I hope this went ahead and cleared things up for you. If not, please feel free to go ahead and contact your teacher. They will point you in the right direction. As always, thank you very much for your time. And until the next video, y'all go ahead and take care. See ya.